Have you ever wondered why our greatest strengths so often curdle into our most spectacular weaknesses? It's one of life's cruelest paradoxes. You see someone with immense talent, with a fire and an ambition that can move mountains, and you think they're going to change the world. But then, somewhere along the way, the story takes a turn. The very confidence that fueled their ascent becomes a blinding arrogance. The ambition that drove them to work harder than anyone else becomes a desperate need for credit. The vision that was once so clear becomes clouded by paranoia and insecurity. Why does success so often plant the seeds of its own destruction? Why do the most promising journeys so often end in a silent, self-inflicted shipwreck? This isn't a problem reserved for CEOs or rock stars or fallen emperors. It's a deeply human struggle that whispers to each of us. It's the voice in our head that, after a small victory, suggests we finally figured it all out, that we can now afford a coast. It's the sting of defensiveness we feel when someone offers feedback, as if they're questioning not just our work, but our very essence. It's the fantasy we indulge in about the life we're going to have, a fantasy so vivid and satisfying that it replaces the grueling, unglamorous work required to actually build it. We are all, in our own way, locked in a battle with this internal saboteur. This is a question that a young, preternaturally successful man named Ryan Holiday became obsessed with. He wasn't a philosopher in an ivory tower or a psychologist in a sterile lab. He was in the trenches of modern ambition, and he saw the casualties piling up around him. He saw it in his clients, he saw it in his mentors, and most terrifyingly, he saw it in the mirror. His journey to find an answer wasn't academic. It was a desperate search for an antidote, a way to navigate the treacherous waters of aspiration, success, and failure without being capsized by the enemy within. To understand the depth of Ryan Holiday's investigation, you have to understand the world that created it. Imagine a young man, not even old enough to legally drink, who drops out of college to apprentice under Robert Greene, the controversial author of the 48 Laws of Power. He wasn't learning history or literature. He was learning the unvarnished mechanics of influence, strategy, and human nature from a modern Machiavelli. He was ambitious, voracious, and wickedly smart. He quickly translated this education into a real-world career that was nothing short of meteoric. By his early 20s, he was a director of marketing for American Apparel, one of the fastest-growing and most talked-about brands in the world. He wasn't just an employee. He was a key strategist, a wunderkind whispering in the ear of its brilliant, volatile, and notoriously ego-driven founder, Dov Charney. This was his laboratory. He had a front-row seat to the daily spectacle of how immense talent and creative genius could be systematically undermined by an unchecked ego. He saw how the very self-belief that allowed a leader to defy convention and build an empire could morph into a paranoid delusion that alienates allies, ignores sound advice, and makes catastrophic decisions. He was living inside a case study, breathing the toxic air of hubris, and watching it corrode a massive, successful enterprise from the inside out. But the scary part wasn't just what he was witnessing in others. It was what he was starting to feel in himself. He was successful. He was getting praise. He was writing for major publications, getting book deals, and being lauded as a prodigy. And with that success came the subtle poison, the feeling that he was special, the hunger for more recognition, more credit, the quiet, insidious belief that he had somehow earned the right to be insulated from criticism or tedious work. He felt the pull of what he would later call the narrative, the story we tell ourselves about our own importance. It's a seductive story, one where we are the hero destined for greatness. The world of marketing, his chosen profession, is built on crafting these narratives for products and brands. He was a master of it, but he realized he was starting to apply the same techniques to himself, polishing the facade while ignoring the foundation. He saw the ghosts of countless brilliant failures, in history, in business, in the arts, and he recognized the same pattern, the same disease. He realized that the conventional path to success, the one that encourages self-promotion and relentless self-belief, was actually a well-trodden road to ruin. This wasn't a philosophical curiosity for him anymore. It was a matter of spiritual and professional survival. He had to dissect this enemy, understand its tactics, and find a timeless, durable philosophy for keeping it in check, before it consumed him just as it had consumed so many before. His quest began not as a search for a new productivity hack, But as a search for wisdom, his deep dive into history and philosophy led him to his first critical breakthrough, a discovery that challenged the very foundation of how we think about ambition. We tend to believe that ego is a problem that arises after we become successful, a consequence of fame and power. But Holliday found the opposite. The enemy is there from the very beginning, at the stage of pure aspiration, before we've accomplished a single thing of note. It's here that the ego is perhaps at its most insidious, because it deals in hypotheticals and fantasies. It convinces us that we are destined for greatness, and in doing so, it subtly absolves us of the need to do the excruciatingly hard work required to achieve it. The perfect historical avatar for this toxic delusion is General George McClellan. During the American Civil War, McClellan was put in command of the entire Union Army. He was brilliant, organized, and charismatic. The press called him the young Napoleon. He looked the part, he talked the part, and he believed the part with every fiber of his being. His ego was fully invested in the idea of being a military genius. The problem was, this identity was built on potential, not proof. This deep-seated belief in his own genius made him pathologically risk-averse. He would spend months training and equipping his massive army, planning the perfect, flawless campaign, but he was perpetually hesitant to actually fight. Why? Because the messy, bloody, uncertain reality of battle threatened the pristine image of the strategic mastermind he constructed in his mind. In his letters, he complained endlessly that he was undermined, that he didn't have enough resources, that the enemy was stronger than they appeared. His ego created a narrative where any potential failure wouldn't be his fault. It was a defense mechanism to protect his reputation. He preferred the guaranteed glory of a perfectly planned, unfought battle to potential shame of an actual, imperfect one. His ego wasn't a source of strength. It was a cage of his own making, paralyzing him and costing the Union dearly in time and lives. Holliday realized this is a trap we all fall into. We talk about the book we're going to write, the business we're going to start, the person we're going to become. We fall in love with the title, with the fantasy of the outcome. The ego finds this storytelling far more gratifying than the quiet, humbling, and often frustrating work of actually laying one brick at a time. The first principle, the antidote to this poison of aspiration, is to ruthlessly subordinate your ego to the craft itself. It's to embrace the mindset of a student. Think of Kirk Hammett auditioning for Metallica, one of the biggest bands in the world. He was already a successful guitarist, but he didn't swagger in. He focused on one thing, playing the music better than anyone else. Even after he was famous, he continued to take lessons from the legendary Joe Satriani, because his identity was guitarist, not rock star. He was a student of his craft, and that humility is what allowed him to continually grow. The first breakthrough isn't about crushing your ambition. It's about rechanneling it away from your own story and into the work itself. True confidence, Holliday discovered, is a byproduct of competence, not a prerequisite for it. So, you follow this first principle. You quiet your ego. You embrace the humble role of the student. You put in 1,000 hours of deliberate, unglamorous practice. And then it happens. You achieve success. The world finally validates your work. You get the promotion, the acclaim, the victory. This is the moment you've been striving for. And it is, without question, the most dangerous moment of all. The discipline that got you through the aspiration phase is not enough to handle what comes next, because now the enemy is no longer just an internal voice. It's being reinforced by everyone around you. Praise, awards, and wealth all serve as fuel for the ego, and can grow from a quiet whisper into a deafening roar. This leads to the second, deeper truth Holliday uncovered, the unique and devastating poison of ego and success. And for this, there is no more tragic or cautionary tale than that of Howard Hughes. Hughes was not a fraud like McClellan. He was a legitimate genius, a visionary who revolutionized both aviation and filmmaking. He built record-breaking airplanes, produced iconic movies, and amassed an astonishing fortune. His success was real, and it was immense. But with each new triumph, his ego calcified. He began to believe his own legend. He slowly, methodically, cut himself off from anyone who might challenge him. Hughes stopped listening to his engineers, his accountants, his advisors. Why would he? He was Howard Hughes. His instincts had made him a billionaire. He became convinced of his own infallibility. which led him to indulge in gargantuan, delusional projects, most famously the Spruce Goose, a massive wooden airplane that was an engineering marvel but a practical and financial catastrophe. He became obsessed with controlling every minute detail of his world, from the precise way his food was prepared to the lives of the actresses he dated. His success created a bubble, an echo chamber where the only voice he heard was his own, magnified and distorted by his ego. He became a prisoner in a gilded cage of his own making, dying as a paranoid, isolated recluse. His story is the ultimate tragedy of what happens when ego is fed by success. It devours reason, empathy, and perspective. It makes you stop learning because you believe you already know everything. It makes you rigid and defensive, desperately trying to protect the reputation you built instead of continuing the humble, curious work that built it in the first place. Holiday realized that the antidote to this is a conscious and continuous practice of sobriety and humility, especially in the face of praise. He points to figures like the great military leader George Marshall, who, after orchestrating the Allied victory in World War II, famously refused to write his memoirs. He had no interest in burnishing his own legend. For him, the work was the point, not the credit he received for it. He constantly deferred praise to his subordinates and focused on the next problem. The deeper truth is that success doesn't mean you've graduated. It means you've simply been admitted to a higher level of study, with more difficult and subtle tests of character. To survive it, you must, against all external validation, remain a student. This journey through aspiration and success revealed two powerful principles, two distinct battlefronts in the war against ego. But it was in examining the third, inevitable part of every human life, failure, that Holiday discovered the grand, unifying theory of everything. The aha moment wasn't that ego is a problem in different stages, but that it is the same fundamental enemy, wearing different masks, that orchestrates our downfall at every turn. It is the common denominator in all self-destruction. The synthesis is this. In aspiration, ego whispers delusions of grandeur to us, so we never start the real work. In success, it whispers delusions of infallibility, so we stop the real work. And in failure, it whispers the most poisonous delusion of all, that it wasn't our fault. It turns a setback into a grievance, a mistake into an injustice. It prevents us from performing the most crucial task for any kind of growth, conducting an honest, painful, and objective assessment of our own role in our misfortune. When we fail, the ego rushes and protects our fragile sense of self. It blames the market, the unfair boss, the ignorant critics, our bad luck. It constructs an elaborate narrative of victimhood, because the alternative, admitting I was wrong, or I wasn't good enough, or I made a mistake, is too painful for it to bear. This is where ego does its most lasting damage. It doesn't just cost us a victory. It robs us of the wisdom that only failure can provide. The ultimate example of transcending this trap is the story of Katharine Graham. When her husband, the publisher of the Washington Post, died by suicide, she was thrust into a position of leadership she never wanted and for which she felt completely unprepared. She was a woman in a 1960s world run entirely by men, many of whom openly viewed her with condescension and doubt. This was a colossal public failure, the failure of her life's plan, the failure to save her husband. Her ego could have reacted in so many destructive ways. It could have made her bitter and resentful, lashing out at those who doubted her. It could have made her retreat into a shell of self-pity. Instead, she performed an act of radical humility. She accepted her situation for what it was. She admitted her ignorance. She surrounded herself with talented people, and most importantly, she listened to them. She put the health of the newspaper, a purpose larger than herself, ahead of her own bruised feelings and insecurities. This subjugation of her ego in the face of devastating failure allowed her to learn, to grow, and to become one of an entire century's most revered and effective leaders, courageously steering the Post through its defining moment, the Watergate scandal. The grand synthesis is that the entire battle of life, from the first hopeful step to the final, painful stumble, is a battle against this one internal enemy. The unifying principle is to always, in every circumstance, connect with reality and disconnect from the story. It is to choose purpose over position and to value the sobering truth of the work over the intoxicating fiction of I. So where does this journey leave us? It leaves us with a blueprint, a philosophy for navigating the entirety of our lives. It's not a set of 3 separate tactics, but a continuous, cyclical practice. When you are aspiring, silence your ego and be a student of your craft. When you find success, silence your ego and remain a student of your craft. And when you inevitably fail, silence your ego and become a student of the lesson that failure is trying to teach you. It is a lifelong commitment to reality over narrative, to humility over hubris. This isn't just an intellectual exercise about historical figures. This is about you. It's about that simmering resentment you feel when a colleague gets a credit for a project you worked on. It's about the defensiveness that flares up when your partner points out a flaw. It's about the fear of starting something new, not because you can't do it, but because you're terrified of not being perfect on the first try. In every one of these moments, the ego is there whispering its toxic counsel, pulling you away from growth and toward stagnation. Ryan Holiday's journey reveals that the greatest obstacle between you and the life you want to live is not the external world. It's the enemy within. Understanding this is the first, most crucial step, but the real transformation comes from applying it, from choosing, day after day, to starve that enemy and feed your purpose instead. This is a quiet battle, fought not on a stage, but in the private moments of decision. If this is a battle you are ready to fight, then you are not alone. Join a community committed to this very practice by subscribing. Think of it not as a clique, but as a commitment to yourself, a promise to become a lifelong student in the art of living. Because in the end, the most profound and lasting power is found not in being the loudest person in the room, but in having the discipline to quiet the loudest voice in your own